Give me about 5 seconds. My name is Jack Good, and I am president of the Arthur D. Shores, Robert S. Vance Inn of Court in Birmingham, Alabama. Our Inn of Court some months ago became involved in and wanted to have the goal of educating the public and each other, lawyers and judges, about the idea of combating human trafficking and modern slavery, which is one of the most important civil rights issues of our era. President Abraham Lincoln in 1864 stated it best: if slavery's not wrong, nothing's wrong. Unfortunately, there is more slavery in the world today and human trafficking than at any time in world history, which just seems incredible. The State Department estimates that the number of slaves worldwide is over 25 million people. Other organizations estimate that number to be a lot higher. There's more slavery and human trafficking in the United States today than at any time in United States history. I find that astounding. 100,000 children at least are trafficked in the United States each and every year out of this group of slaves. Interstate Highway 20, I-20, that runs through Birmingham to Atlanta, is the most trafficked stretch of interstate highway in the United States. That's unacceptable. Our program, for this reason, is entitled Human Trafficking in Our Own Backyard, a panel discussion. We all have a role in stopping the social and criminal plague in Alabama and elsewhere. I would like to thank the International Academy of Trial Lawyers and its president, Mark White, along with Academy members Augusta Dowd and Labella Alice, for having worked to make this evening's program possible. I would also like to thank the Birmingham Bar Association and its executive director, Jennifer Bittner, for supporting this event tonight. At this time, I would ask Carla Ward, our panel moderator, to introduce herself, giving a brief personal background, and then in turn ask each of the panelists to do the same. Hopefully we will have time for questions at the end. Carla, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Carla Ward. I'm an assistant U.S. attorney in Birmingham. I do civil rights at that office, and our office civil rights includes human trafficking. I've been there for about 3 years. Before that, I worked at firms in Boston and went to the University of Alabama School of Law, but moved away for a while, and now I'm happy to be back in the state.
Hello, and thank you for having me here tonight. My name is Carolyn Potter. I'm the director at the Well House. And at the Well House, we work with survivors of human trafficking. We have a comprehensive program of service. And prior to coming to the Well House, I had worked in child advocacy, primarily in South Carolina with the South Carolina Guardian Ad Litem program, and then with Alabama CASA. And so working with survivors of human trafficking has been an extension of that work with child advocacy, because we now know that 60% of trafficking victims were trafficked out of foster care. And so that's alarming, but we're all working to combat that.
I'm Trent Kempster. I work for the Tuscaloosa Police Department. I'm currently assigned to West Alabama Human Trafficking Task Force. I've been there at the police department going on 23 years. Most of the time I spend in narcotics. Got an opportunity to come over to the Code Enforcement Division about 2 years ago now. And since then we formed the Human Trafficking Task Force, which is made up of Tuscaloosa police officers, Northport police officers, Tuscaloosa County Sheriff's Office, and University Police Department. Our narcotics unit was made up similar to that. We saw that human trafficking, localized prostitution really ranged from not just our city, but also Northport County and at the university. So we decided to combine all of our resources together and work as one unit to fight this.
I'm Doug Gilmer. I'm the resident agent in charge for Homeland Security investigations for our Birmingham field office. HSI is the principal investigative arm of the Department of Homeland Security. DHS has been very involved since its very inception in human trafficking, both sex and labor trafficking. We manage the DHS Blue Campaign. The Blue Campaign is the government's single point of contact and source of information and education for human trafficking, whether it be sex trafficking or labor trafficking. HSI has a very broad portfolio of federal crimes that we investigate, over 400 federal statutes, but really there's nothing much more important than human trafficking, whether it's domestic trafficking of people who are born and raised here in the United States, or foreign nationals who are smuggled or otherwise brought into the United States for the purpose of exploitation. Our number one priority is the victim, regardless of who they are or where they're from. It's to protect that victim.
I'm Jordan Giddens. I'm the Finance Director and Director of Member Services for the Alabama House Democratic Caucus. I am a Birmingham native, and in 2015, I was lucky enough to not be trafficked, but got about as close as you can with being able to walk away. So now I'm working on trying to pass stronger legislation in the House and Senate during this legislative session, and I've been working with the International Academy of Trial Lawyers since last year on really expanding their initiative here in Birmingham.
So we don't have to pass the microphone all the way down every time. I feel like I can talk pretty loudly, so I'm just going to ask questions in my own voice. Let me know if you can't hear me. But just as you're speaking to a room full of lawyers here, so to give us kind of framework for what we're talking about, can you tell us, we can start with you, Doug, on the federal side, and maybe Trent, Jordan, whoever wants to jump in on the state side, what is the legal definition of human trafficking?
So human trafficking from the federal perspective is any time in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which a sex act is induced by a minor, someone under the age of 18, in which a minor cannot consent to a sexual act. And so in that instance, we don't need force, fraud, or coercion in that particular sense. That's sex trafficking. Labor trafficking is similar in that it is some type of work or service that is performed often under the threat of force, fraud, or coercion, in which something of value is exchanged. It could be money, it could be other services. It comes in various forms. It could be domestic servitude, it could be forced labor, peonage, bondage, really any form of slavery whatsoever. So those are really the two forms of trafficking from a federal perspective, and it's important to make the differentiation between smuggling and trafficking. Sometimes there's overlap between human smuggling and human trafficking, but human smuggling by definition is when a person illegally enters the United States, typically for a fee. They enter voluntarily, and in such a way in which they are intentionally seeking to violate the immigration laws of the United States. That's human smuggling. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes trafficking involves smuggling, but they are really two distinct crimes that are often charged separately.
How about on the state side? Does anyone want to speak to that in Alabama?
Well, as far as the state side, we parallel the federal guidelines for the most part. We focus on force, fraud, or coercion. We have two different, we have human trafficking first, human trafficking second. They passed a new thing, I believe, last year. I think for us, a minor goes all the way up to 19 now for the state of Alabama, as far as human trafficking, just in that area. We have, like I said, two separate sections. If you knowingly financially benefit from it, recruit, entice, try to bring people into this type of a crime that also falls under the human trafficking. And the biggest thing we focus on, are the girls made to do it? Are they tricked into do it, forced? Like I said, the coercion. And the biggest thing we see on coercion, the biggest obstacle I saw when I first came over, is we were told, well, the girl was free to leave. She wasn't being physically held captive. Well, that's kidnapping. That's something different. What we really see more of is a mental coercion. They're mentally restrained. Even though they have the freedom to leave, they don't think they can. Or if they do leave, their family's going to be killed, their kids are going to be killed. We had one in Tuscaloosa that she was told, if you don't make $1,000 a day for me, we're going to take your child and put it in the microwave. And they actually had her child held in an apartment in Memphis, Tennessee. They were fortunate enough to get the child rescued that night and arrest the people that were in Memphis. But the mental hold that these girls have is nothing like you've ever experienced before in this, and that's something that we're trying to get out to people. Even though they're in a hotel room and may not have the pimp or the trafficker there with them, they still think, I can't leave.
So digging into that a little more, we talked about coercion. Just to reiterate, if it's a minor, coercion is not required. But what are some other forms of coercion that you've seen, Doug, if you can speak to that and some cases you've investigated?
A lot of the same things that Trent mentioned, the mental coercion, the women just feeling as if they are trapped. And in actuality, they are. Like Trent said, they can walk away, they can walk to go get food or whatnot, and to the average person, they may think that this person's just doing this on their own, but they have no idea of the chains that are wrapped around their mind that are keeping them held hostage, to that trafficker or to that pimp. We see a lot of other forms. I mean, we have had people that we've interviewed that have been told that if you go to the police, we're going to kill your family. We'll kill you, we'll kill your family. And not only are we going to kill your family here in the United States, but we know where they live in El Salvador. And we're going to kill your family there. And we're going to kill your brother, your sister. They will, oftentimes, if they're foreign nationals, they'll take their documents, their travel documents, even domestically. If they're born in just a person born here in Birmingham, if they get involved with the trafficker is going to take all forms of identification and try and strip the identity away from that person, so that even if they were to get away, there's nothing to prove who they are, where they're from, and just make that job for law enforcement or anybody that encounters them that much more difficult.
So, Carolyn, moving to you, two related questions. How widespread is human trafficking in the United States and in Alabama? And then what types of human trafficking do you see working with victims here in Alabama?
Well, as it's already been said today or this evening, that I-20 is a major trafficking corridor. It's also been reported, just national studies and data tell us that 40% of human trafficking happens in the Southeast. It's definitely widespread. I know at the Well House, we help with, we define rescue as actually getting the survivor to us. We do not go in, kick down the door and rescue victims. We leave that to these guys. But getting them to us is what we term as rescue. And our rescues are from all over the United States. On any given day, probably 60% of our girls are from other states. And then, of course, in Alabama, locally, I know it's hard to believe, there was just a big article in the newspaper tonight, or on the news tonight, about arrest in Homewood and victims who were recovered. So it's widespread. It's everywhere. And tell me your question.
I guess specific to Birmingham, I think you mentioned that. what type of human trafficking situations have you encountered?
Okay, so we only serve victims of sexual exploitation through human trafficking. And so our, over having done this for a few years now, we've begun to see a pattern. One is the majority of the ladies who come to us, or girls who come to us, were first victimized as children. And that's where it began for them. And so that made them very vulnerable to a trafficker who was able to lure them into prostitution and, forcing them to sell themselves. And also, a part of that is just like Trent said earlier, just the extreme mental trauma. To help our girls, we have 2 staff therapists, and they both specialize in trauma therapy. We're about to open what we're calling a trauma center. We're not sure what else to call it, and it's designated for those who are most severely traumatized, and so that they can be helped. Otherwise, we lose them back to the streets.
And Trent and Doug, if you guys can speak for a minute, maybe as to some of the types of cases you're seeing in the Tuscaloosa, Northport area and in the Northern District.
We see mainly women that are traveling through Tuscaloosa. We arrest probably more people in Tuscaloosa than anybody in the state does. We don't have a bigger problem. We just address it more. We're very proactive on it. We run several details a year. But we've really swapped up what we're doing. We used to only target the females. Now we try to take a balanced approach. We target the Johns, the males that are actually responding to the ads that are already placed, and then we place undercover ads and have our female officers pose as undercovers, set up hotel rooms, wire them up, call the Johns to the room, negotiate a deal, and arrest them. The only difference is every one of those guys that are buying sex, they go to jail. The females, we've really swapped and changed over to a victim-centered approach, and we arrest very few. The ones that are arrested don't want help, they aren't trafficked, or other underlying circumstances. But if they're a trafficking victim and they want help and they'll accept it, which we offer every single time, we don't arrest them.
So, Carla, can I ask a question along those lines? In reading the article that Carolyn is referring to about the homeward arrest, I noted that there was one victim of human trafficking that was identified and sent to rescue. I don't know, Carolyn, if she came to you. It was a minor.
Yeah.
So along the lines, Trent, of what you're talking about, and the others were arrested for prostitution, and you've touched upon this a little bit in that last answer, what do y'all look for to differentiate the victim versus the prostitute?
It's difficult sometimes because these girls are so traumatized, it's hard to get them, they don't trust anybody, much less a police officer. So what we've done is we have a lot of female officers that are on our task force. We wear plain clothes. This is what I wear to work every day, something similar to this. And we come in, we don't handcuff them, we talk to them different. And really it all comes down to interviewing them. The average interview for us on a suspected human trafficking victim is 4 to 6 hours. We have to go in there and break those barriers down, try to get them to trust us. We look at evidence that's in the phones. We look and see if there's a pimp on site, and we do all that ahead of time with surveillance teams and initial intel into them. We run the phone numbers to see where they've placed ads. As far as the United States, we have a database that we can look into and see every place a commercial sex ad was placed using that telephone. So we take all that into consideration. Then if we think we have one, obviously we pull them back in a neutral environment away from the trafficker if he is there. And it all comes down to interview skills. We have to talk to them and try to get them to open up to us.
So coming from a victim-centered approach like these gentlemen do, I'd like to further elaborate on that a little bit. I can't see you from here, but I suspect that if more investigation is done, and if these law enforcement officers are trained and in an approach to investigate, that they will find that these young ladies who are arrested and now being charged with prostitution are actually more likely than not victims of human trafficking. That's an opinion from having done this, and I mean, I just think when they dig into it, we'll probably see a little more than that.
I agree with that, totally.
You know, a lot of times, I mean, the simple answer, how do you differentiate between a trafficking victim and somebody that's just doing this for money, whether you call them a prostitute or you're prostituting themselves or whatnot, the simple answer is choice. But that's not a real simple answer to always get to. And like Carolyn said, a lot of these girls, even the ones that we encounter, whether it's here or elsewhere in the country, that may actually be doing this, you know, by choice, whether it's to support a habit or whatever the case might be. If you look back far enough in their lifetime, you'll find that as they were a child, they were victims of sexual exploitation. They were abused by a family member or a friend or whatever, and that's really kind of what led them on this path. And probably at some point, even if they're not a trafficking victim now, at one time they were a trafficking victim. They've somehow gotten away, but this is the only life that they know. They're still held hostage, you know, by the life that they were once in, or from the tragedy that, you know, that's followed them ever since childhood. One other form of coercion that we didn't mention is drug abuse. We have women and men, male trafficking victims, who are intentionally addicted. Their trafficker or their pimp will intentionally get them addicted to heroin or meth as a way to maintain control over them. You know, if you've ever dealt with, you know, especially with a heroin addict that is, you know, going through withdrawals and, you know, the DTs and whatnot, it's a horrible thing to watch. And nobody wants to go through that. And a heroin victim or a meth or a heroin addict or a meth addict, that craving is just so strong that if they don't get it, they get sick. It's a horrible sensation. And so the only way to continue to get that fixed now is to keep their trafficker and, you know, their trafficker happy. And that's by doing what the trafficker wants. So, you know, in terms of cases that we see in Birmingham, you know, we do, again, we do sex and labor trafficking. We investigate minors, we investigate domestic trafficking, and the trafficking of foreign nationals. We kind of do it all. And we see it all here in Birmingham. We see it in Shelby County, we see it in Mountain Brook, we see it, there's nowhere you can go in this area and not encounter all different forms of, you know, of human trafficking. You know, there are a lot of minors that are being trafficked through this area. It's taken us a while to kind of figure out exactly how that's being done, because the people that traffic minors are very careful about not placing ads on commercial sex sites where a person would typically go, because it's too risky. So they have found other means by which to advertise and sell minors for commercial sex. And again, it's taken us a while to kind of figure out what's going on, but I think we're starting to get a handle on it now, and the number of minor victims that we're recovering now is on the increase.
And also, just speaking briefly to your question, I just want to clarify, on the federal side, there are not prostitution charges. There's only human trafficking. Those are state charges. There have been times, I think, where victims have been prosecuted for human trafficking because they've acted as the enforcer for a pimp. We refer to that as the bottom in those kind of schemes. But they're victims too, so it is a very hard question and thing to encounter. But speaking about the Homewood sting, I mean, that made the front page of AL.com. If human trafficking is so widespread, why are we not seeing more of those? What are some barriers to investigating, and I can speak to prosecuting those types of cases?
A lot of it's resources. Most human trafficking cases are not, they're not easy cases to make. They're often manpower intensive, resource intensive cases. If you have limited resources in an office or an agency, it can quickly deplete your investigative manpower or investigative resources. And one of the other barriers, traditionally that we're finding is just the lack of education of exactly what human trafficking is, and getting away from this old school approach of every victim. Well, they're not victims; they're just prostitutes, or they'll use other words to describe what they are, and trying to convince people to move away from that mentality and really see them for what they are. But this has been a challenge, because prostitution wasn't illegal in the state of Alabama until 2007. There were city ordinances against prostitution, but there wasn't a state law against prostitution in Alabama until 2007. So we're only 12 years from that point. And so we still have a lot of catching up to do in terms of education and directing resources to where they need to be, especially from the state and local level. I mean, we've had federal statutes for a long time, but we work very closely with our state and federal or with our state and local partners on a number of these cases. We work very closely with Tuscaloosa. And we bring manpower and resources to what they do, and in turn, they help us out. And you've got to have that collective energy, because it's almost too big for one person or one agency to do unilaterally.
And I would love to hear Jordan speak to that, because I know, has had personal experience with those exact issues, Doug, that you're describing, and I think it would be good to hear him talk briefly about that.
Yeah, so in 2015, a little bit of background, I was drugged at a bar downtown and kidnapped. Ended up going and pulling up behind a U-Haul. People were duct taped their mouths and behind their back. Luckily, because I'm a crybaby, I didn't get sold into human trafficking, and my abductor decided to take me home for himself. So when I got out of that and was eventually able to, I didn't have my wallet, it was separated, a friend of his had it. Kind of as Doug had said earlier, they immediately separate you from your identity so that if you're found, no one's gonna know who you are. And I was so severely drugged that I was drugged for 3 days. And I felt drunk for 3 full days. That's how strong some of this medicine is that they're using. So not only was I out of it, but cops, when I come up and I'm a male gay victim, I'm outside of Quest Club, that's immediately, sometimes that can be a barrier if you're LGBT to get fair justice in the South. Otherwise, my case is closed and I was never really followed up on. A rape kit is sitting in a basement somewhere downtown, and I'm not going to push it anymore. But what I am going to do is make sure that the law enforcement officers feel fully empowered by the laws that exist. I think one of the big barriers is that the agents or the officers on the local level aren't aware of how much power they have to take down some of these traffickers, because a lot of this legislation is relatively brand new. The first human trafficking laws were passed in 2011 and updated in 2015. We have really, really strong laws here in Alabama. We're rated an A. We just moved up from a B to an A from 2017 to 18. So we have the protections here. It's just, as Doug said, a matter of kind of shifting the resources and getting everyone educated on this small level. These 2- and 3-person police departments that are in rural areas off of I-20 and I-65, where they might not realize that they need to get educated on human trafficking because they don't see it as plainly as it's happening here in Birmingham. So it's just a matter of kind of reallocating resources and training everyone in an efficient manner.
So speaking to us as a room full of lawyers, what are some things we can do and ways to get involved? Carolyn, what are some ways we can help legally